Okay, Rabotai. Erev Shabbat Shalom U'Mvorach. Tonight we're studying Parsha Tisa. Tisa is infamous for Chet HaEgel. It's the Parsha with the Jewish people. They bow down to the golden calf, as the people call it. So the point of tonight's class is not to necessarily analyze the sin of Chet HaEgel, which there has been much ink spilled to try to grasp the fact that you had Jewish people who just came out of Mitzrayim and they witnessed hundreds of miracles that took place in Mitzrayim and Kiryat Yamsuf and Nes upon Nes, and yet they were still able to do Chet HaEgel. That's a separate topic. I want to more focus on the ramifications, what came out of the sin, and how we can achieve at least a partial kapara. I say the word partial atonement because our rabbis tell us that it's almost going to be impossible to fully get atonement for the Chet HaEgel. The rabbis tell us, in fact, that every single generation after the Chet HaEgel, we've had Hashem punishes every single generation in a small way because of the sin of Chet HaEgel. They give a mashal. Mishal comes to a rabbi called Magi Miduvna. Magi Miduvna says that one time there was a king, and his son, he sinned against him. He did something horrible to the kingdom, and the king was so upset that he told the son that he's gonna take a giant boulder and throw it on the prince. He's gonna kill him in 1 second. And then the next morning he felt bad for the threat that he made on his son, but yet he's the king. And if it doesn't go well on his word, then people are going to take his word very cheap, very lightly. Therefore, he went to his advisor and he says, what am I going to do? I threatened my son to kill him and I have to go through with it. So the advisor told him, he said, listen, your threat was that you would take a giant boulder and throw it on the prince. He goes, instead of taking that giant boulder, take a hammer, smash the boulder in 1 billion rocks, and then slowly take the rocks and throw it on the prince instead. And that way, you'll fulfill your word by throwing the rock on the king, but you're not on the prince, but you're not going to kill him. So that's the mashal. The mashal is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he told Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm going to kill the Jewish people. After they worshipped the golden calf, he said, I'm going to kill. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, listen, you didn't say how you're going to kill. You didn't say when you're going to kill. Therefore, instead of wiping out the Jewish people at that moment in one shot, so take small rocks, small pebbles, and throw it on the prince, and that way they're going to achieve atonement. So therefore, there's every single generation, there's little punishment that Hashem gives us throughout all the generations as a result of Chet HaEgel. So we don't know why there are terrorist attacks in Israel. We don't know why something like the Holocaust could have happened. We don't know why there was a Spanish Inquisition. But you could definitely know that part of the reason why we had those things is because of Chet HaEgel. It's definitely in there somewhere. Therefore, the point of the class again is to analyze the ramifications of what happened by Chet HaEgel, and if there's a way we could possibly achieve a little bit partial atonement, partial kapara. So we start with the very first source. It says in this week's parasha, "Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemor," that God spoke to Moshe saying, "Ve'ata," and you, daber el bnei Yisrael lemor, you're going to tell the Jewish people saying, "Ach et shabbatotai tishmoru," that you should just keep the Shabbat. Oti b'nei b'nechem, because it's considered a sign between me and between you, l'dorotechem, for all generations, l'dat ki ani Hashem makadishchem, because I am Hashem, I am God who makes you holy. It says Rashi on the spot, ve'ata daber el bnei Yisrael, ve'ata afapi shivkadati l'savota amalech hamishkan. Even though it was you, Moshe Rabbeinu, who commanded the Jewish people to build the Mishkan, ayakel be'enecha l'tchot et Shabbat p'rei ota melacha. Don't think that since the Mishkan is so important, don't think that Binyan HaMishkan overrides Shmirat Shabbat. That there's Shmirat Shabbat and there's Binyan HaMishkan. It's two different things. So therefore, don't think just because I commanded you to build the Mishkan is not more important than Shabbat. And therefore, there's Mishkan and there's Shabbat. Don't mix the two up. Says the next Rashi, Ach et Shabbatotai tishmoru. HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses the word Ach. What does Ach mean? Says Rashi, Afapi shetiyiru dufim uzrizin bizizrut hamilacha. Even though the Jewish people, they're very excited to build the Mishkan, they had a lot of alacrity, they were very excited to build the Mishkan. Still, says Rashi, Shabbat al titche befaneha. Shabbat is not pushed off because Melachat HaMishkan. Melachat HaMishkan you build during the week, but Shabbat you keep Shabbat. Says Rashi, Kol achin verakin mi'utin leme'at Shabbat Melachat HaMishkan. Every time you have the word in the Torah, either rak or ach. In this pasuk it says ach shabbatotai tishmoru. Ach. What does ach mean? Says Rashi, every time you see the word ach or rak, it's coming to minimize something. What is it coming to minimize? It's coming to minimize that even though Melachat HaMishkan, the construction of the Mishkan, the construction of the tabernacle in the Midbar is considered important, still when it comes to Shemirat Shabbat, don't push off Shabbat for Mishkan. My question on these two Pesukim are very simple, and it's as follows. That's the whole class, Rabotai. Did you get these two questions good? And the class is going to flow. Number one, we have a discrepancy in the way Hashem talks to Moshe in these Pesukim. Usually when Hashem talks to Moshe, it says, Vaydaber Hashem and Moshe lemor, and then commandment. That's the way it usually goes. Never do you see Vaydaber Hashem and Moshe, and all of a sudden he throws in the words Ve'ata, and you. Well, we know that Hashem is talking to Moshe. Hence the word Vayomer Hashem and Moshe lemor, that God is speaking to Moshe, saying Ve'ata. What is the Ve'ata? What is the and you going in this pasuk that Hashem had to point at Moshe Rabbeinu and you? That's question number one. Question number two, it says in this pasuk again, Ach. Ach is coming to minimize. That I might have thought that Melechet HaMishkan, Binyan HaMishkan, when it comes to building the tabernacle in the Midbar, it's so important. However, Ach tells me it's not as important as Shmirat Shabbat. Don't think you could build the Mishkan on Shabbat. Our rabbis ask, why do you have to tell me Ach Lema'et? What is the Ach coming to tell me? We have a general rule. If a person has two mitzvot aseh in front of him, he has the mitzvot aseh of Shmirat Shabbat. He has the mitzvot aseh to build the Mishkan. As long as I can fulfill both of them, I wouldn't need a pasuk to come and tell me, oh, one is coming to exclude the other. Let me do Binyat HaMishkan in the 6 days of the week. Let me do Shmirat Shabbat on Shabbat itself, and therefore we're all good. Why does the Torah have to come along and tell me Ach, to tell me that Shmirat Shabbat or Binyan HaMishkan does not override Shmirat Shabbat? Are those two questions clear? Number one, why does Hashem throw in the word Ve'ata, speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu? We know he's talking to Moshe Rabbeinu because that's the context of the pasuk. And secondly, I don't need a pasuk to tell me Ach, to tell me, oh, Shmirat Shabbat is more important than Binyat HaMishkan. I could do both. I could do Binyan HaMishkan 6 days of the week, and Shmirat Shabbat will come on Shabbat. I don't need the pasuk to tell me Ach lema'et. It's unnecessary. You understand the question? So, to give a simple answer finds itself in source number 2. Says the Torah, Vayiten el Moshe kikalato ledaber ito behar Sinai, shnei luchot ha'idut, luchot even ketuvim be'etzba Elokim. Says the Rashi on the spot, Vayiten el Moshe, very important Rashi, famous Rashi in the Torah. Says Rashi, En mugdam umuchar b'Torah. Oh, the rule that everybody knows. There's no such thing as literally late and early in the Torah. What does that mean? That even though the Torah is seemingly a storybook, don't think the Torah is going in order. Sometimes the stories that we read that happened inside the Torah, it really happened much later or much earlier than it's put into sequence. There is no order that's necessarily in sequence in which the story happened. Says Rashi, and this is a perfect example. Don't think because the Torah in Parshiot Terumah, Tetzaveh, Tisa, Vayakel, Pikudei. Don't think that they happen in this necessary order. That first it was Binyan HaMishkan, then it was Shmirat Shabbat, then it was Chayta Egel. Says Rashi, no, you're getting it all wrong. Really, Chayta Egel happened way before Binyan HaMishkan. Look at Rashi inside. It says Rashi, we're in source number 2, Maaseh Egel, the bowing down of the Egel, which happens in this week's parasha, it happened way before the two parashot that was before us. Maseh Egel Kodem Tzvu'ei Melechet HaMishkan. It happened way before Melechet HaMishkan. Yamim Rabim Haya. It was many days. How does Rashi know this? He says, well, I'll do a very simple mathematical date calculation. What's the calculation? Shaare Yud Zayin B'Tammuz Dishburu HaLuchot. Because it was on Shiv Asar B'Tammuz, which we fast on because the Luchot were broken. That means it was on that day that the Bnei Yisrael worshipped Chayta Egel. And what happened after Shivat B'Tammuz? Ubiyom HaKippurim nitratzak l'Shemchu Yisrael. It wasn't until 2 months later, almost 2 months later, that Hashem came down and Moshe said, so it wasn't until a month and a half later that Hashem forgave the Jewish people on Chayta Egel. And then only after that, Mahurat. The next day after Yom Kippur, Hitchilu b'nidvat HaMishkan v'hukam b'echad b'Nisan. It wasn't until the next day they began collecting the funds for the Mishkan, and it wasn't until Rosh Chodesh Nisan that the Mishkan was finally inaugurated, was finally finished. So how could you tell me Parashiot, Terumah, Tetzaveh, and the beginning of Parsha Tisa happened before Chayta Egel? That's not true. Mathematical calculation happened many more months before Chayta Egel. Therefore, Rashi wants to learn from here the En Mugda Umuchar B'Torah. The Torah doesn't have any specific sequence. It doesn't stick to any specific storyline. Really, Chayta Egel happened way before, and then afterwards it happened Parashat HaMishkan. So the question is, why did indeed HaKadosh Baruch Hu make it that our Parshiot have it, that we first have Binyat HaMishkan, then we have Shmirat Shabbat, and only then do we have Chayta Egel? When Chayta Egel happened many months before Binyat HaMishkan. Is the question clear? So therefore, it's possible, I want to suggest an answer based on Shulchan Aruch. If you look at source number 3, it's not really Shulchan Aruch, it's really the Ramah mentions it. Look at the very last line of source number 3. The Ramah says, he quotes the Or Zarua, and he says, "V'yichavein sheyatchil tamid likra b'devar tov v'yisem b'devar tov." Says the Rama that when a person is reading the Torah, it's very important that when you start reading the Torah, you should read the Torah in a good situation, in a happy situation, and end it off also in a positive situation. Therefore, according to the Rama, you could explain the reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't want us to begin reading Parashiyot of Chet HaEgel is because when you start reading Chet HaEgel, which Bemet happened first, you're not starting B'Dvar Tov. In that case, you're starting B'Dvar Ra. And therefore, in order to fulfill this Rama, which is really an Or Zarua, we wanted to start the Parashiyot with something positive, with something that's considered a Tov. That's considered a Binat HaMishkan. Then you have Shemirat Shabbat. And then only afterwards, in somewhere in the middle, we'll stick in Chet HaEgel. We try to forget about it. And then at the end, what do we end off? We end off with the second Luchot HaBrit. Therefore, according to the Rama, or at least you could suggest, the reason why Hashem did it this way, where you first have Mishkan, Shabbat, Egel, even though Egel happened way before Shemirat Shabbat and Mishkan, was in order to start B'Devar Tov and end B'Devar Tov. That's a possible suggestion of why Hashem did it that way. Question.
Egel is last.
Egel is written last, but it happened first. Therefore, I want to suggest the reason why we did it that way is in order not to start the Parashiyot with Egel. We don't want to start.
Ending with something bad.
It's not. It's ending with the second Luchot. It's ending with second Luchot. Shabbat, Mishkan, Shabbat, Egel, second Luchot. It's Egel, second Luchot. Therefore, since we want to start and end on a positive note, therefore, that's why they did it that way. But there's a deeper answer, Rabotai. There's a much deeper answer. If you look at source number 4. This comes from Midrash Rabbi. It says source number 4 as follows. Ele pikudeh Mishkan ha'idut. Right? This is regarding the Mishkan itself. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yavo zahav hamishkan v'yichaper al zahav ha'egel. Incredible. The reason why we were commanded on biniyat hamishkan, or to build a Mishkan, was because the Mishkan itself was a way to forgive the Jewish people for Chet HaEgel. Just like the Chet HaEgel, just like the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf, was made out of gold. That's why the Mishkan is also made out of gold. To say that this gold, the gold of the Mishkan, is mechaper on the gold of the golden calf. Says the Midrash, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Israel, Hashem told the Jewish people, Bisha'a she'asitem et ha'egel, at the time that you made the golden calf, and you went ahead and you angered me, and you pointed to the golden calf and you said, this is the God that took you out of Egypt, this golden calf took you out of Egypt. Now that you built the Mishkan, in this Elah, when we say the words Elah HaMishkan, this Elah is mechaper on that Elah. Just like when you said these, meaning this is the God that took you out, when you come along and you say this is the Mishkan Ha'idut, this is mechaper for that. Therefore, we made a tikkun a little bit. The fact that we called the Mishkan something that's considered for God, it's considered mechaper, it's considered being an atonement for the Chet HaEgel itself. This Elah Pikudei Mishkan that we quote is a kapara for the Elah that's quoted by Chet HaEgel. The Midrash Tanchuma says it a little deeper, and he says in source number 5, Mishkan Ha'idut, Midrash is questioning, why do we call the Mishkan Ha'idut? Idut literally means testimony. So why is Mishkan called Mishkan, the tabernacle of testimony? Says the Midrash, I'll tell you why. Idut lechol ha'amot. This is the Mishkan, the tabernacle, is a testimony for the rest of the nations. What is it, a testimony? Shekadosh Baruch Hu shenitratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu liYisrael. That God, He became appeased. Even though the Bnei Yisrael, they worshipped the golden calf, Hashem was appeased. Al Maaseh Egel. Ketzad. How was He appeased? When they did the Chet HaEgel, Amad Moshe v'limed alehem stanigoria. Moshe came along and he defended the Jewish people. This as a side point. How did he defend the Jewish people? What did Moshe Rabbeinu come along and he said to Hashem, if we could maybe capitalize on something that Moshe Rabbeinu said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we could use that as a way to maybe anytime the Jewish people sin, just look inside the Torah, see how the biggest sin of Am Yisrael was created, and how Hashem forgave that sin. Whatever Moshe Rabbeinu said, we come along, we say the same thing. Well, indeed, what did Moshe Rabbeinu say? That Hashem said, you know what? I'll let it slide this time. Well, we read it in all fast days. We read it in the Parshat HaShivot. We just read a couple of days on Tanit Esther. What did he say? Moshe Rabbeinu came along and told Hashem, Lama Hashem yichrei apecha be'amecha? Why are you getting angry on your nation? Asher hotzeita meretz Mitzrayim bekoach gadol ubiyad hazaka. Why are you getting angry at your nation that you took out of Egypt bekoach gadol, with great strength, ubiyad hazaka, in a strong arm? Now let's pause for a minute. If you were upset at somebody, and that somebody comes along and says, why are you getting upset at that person? Aren't you the guy that saved them? Bekoach gadol ubiyad hazaka. You're coming along, you're telling the guy that's angry that, hey, listen, you saved this guy with great strength. Would that make it worse or would that make it better? Lamashal, Rabotai, lahavdil. This might be a bad example, but lahavdil, don't stone me for this example, but I'll say it anyway, just to make the point go clear. You can end the video right there. Let's say you have a guy, first thing that came to my head, let's say you have a guy who found out there was a woman in captivity. And he's like, you know what? I have to save this woman. She's being beaten. She's being molested. Her children are being put to abadim. I have to do something. So he finds out exactly where the guy is, where the house was, and in the middle of the night, like a SWAT team, puts on the night vision goggles. He puts on a bulletproof vest in black. He goes like this with the black, and he comes in M16, the whole 9 yards, and he goes inside, firefight, but he ends up saving the girl. And a few weeks later, after he saves the girl, they get married. Big simcha, big wedding. And not a few weeks after the wedding, Bar Minan, he finds out that she's cheating on him. Oh, why? This guy, he saved her life, and she has the chutzpah to come along and be unfaithful to the man who saved it. And what happens? His best friend comes along. He says, "Listen, what are you getting upset at her? Aren't you the guy that saved her from that rat's house? You went in with the night vision and the black and the." And the guy says, "Habibi, that's exactly why I'm upset at her. Because I took her out with night vision and with SWAT team and with M16s. That's exactly why I'm upset at her. So why would Moshe Rabbeinu come along and say, oh, Asher hotzeitem meret Mitzrayim be'koach gadol u'biyad hazaka? What kind of ta'ana is that on Moshe Rabbeinu's part? You understand the question, Abutai? So there's an unbelievable Magid Biduvna. He says, Mashal. He says, Mashal. He goes, let's say you had a guy once that it was an alman. Alman is a widower. He lost his wife. So after many years as the bachelor, he decides, you know what? I think it's time for me to date again. He goes to the shadchan. He says, listen, do you have anybody for me? I think I want to get back into the game. So she tells me, yeah. In fact, I do have somebody. I think she's a good fit. And he says, you know what? I never been on a blind date before. I don't like going on blind dates. Is it possible that I can see a picture? So the shadchan says, well, we don't really show pictures in shadchanut, but if you want. She owns the cafe that's not far, that's down the block. And she goes over there, she has coffee, she has pancakes, she has eggs, she has the whole 9 yards. You could go, believe that you're a customer, make an order, you could check her out over there. He says, okay, fine, great. He goes to the store, he goes to the restaurant. She's tsinuah, she's modest, she speaks in a very nice way. He's like, you know what, I think this is a good match. He tells the shadchan, set it up. Baruch Hashem, they go out, a couple of dates here and there. He's like, you know what, I think this is a girl for me, and he wants to propose. So he tells the shadchan, I think I'm ready. I think she's the one for me, but we have to speed it up because truth is, I'm very excited. I don't want to wait anymore. So the shadchan says, listen, she told me that she's not ready to get married because she has certain debts on the cafe. And the fact that she has debts, she doesn't want to think about marriage at the same time having these debts on the cafe. Therefore, she'd rather wait until she pays off the chovot. God says, okay. He was excited, but now the fire died down a little bit. But then he gets a call from the shadchan the day later. He's like, you know what? I have an idea. I know that you're very excited to marry this girl. Why don't, instead of you having to wait that she pays off the debts, why don't you pay the debt off for her? He says, okay, how much is it? He goes, a couple of $1,000, let's say $3,000. He goes, oh, that's all it is. Great. He goes, he pays the debt $3,000. The moment he pays the debt, he goes to the cafe, he goes, listen, you should know, I paid off your debt, and I'm ready to get married. And she says now? He goes, right now, let's go. We're going to go to the Rabbanut. We're going to get marriage certification. We'll get hitched, as they say in Vegas. So she says, but I'm in the middle of making pancakes. So he goes, it's okay, forget the pancakes. She goes, it just 2 minutes. She goes, forget the 2 minutes, take the pancakes, throw them in the garbage, let's go. So he says, you know what, instead of throwing them in the garbage, I'm going to take them with me. She takes half-baked pancakes and puts them inside the bag. She takes the bag, she puts it inside her pocketbook. He says, why are you putting the pancakes inside your pocketbook? She goes, what do you care? Take the pancakes, it's okay. And on the way there, she says, listen, but I have no dress. She's in her work clothing, it's dirty, it has the egg yolk on it, it has the coffee spill. She goes, I need a dress. He goes, no problem. He takes her to Macy's, gets her from top to bottom, and as she's changing, he takes her old clothes and he puts it in his bag. Okay, strange situation. She's putting half-baked pancakes. He's putting dirty clothes, but they do it and they get married. Baruch Hashem, tov. A few weeks later, what happens is every single marriage. So they began to get into arguments, and the man was so offended that she must have said something really bad. So he tells her, he goes, "How could you disrespect me in such a brazen fashion? Do you remember what you looked like before I got married to you?" And he pulls out those old clothes that she was changing inside the room. He goes, this is what you look like before you got married to me. He goes, and now look at you. You look much better than you looked before you got married. And he pulled the clothing was like a testimony on what a miskinah that she was before she got married to him. And she says, you're pulling out a bag of old clothing. She pulls out the half-baked pancakes. And she says, look how you could not wait for me even 2 minutes, even to get the pancakes cooked, you couldn't wait. He goes, and now you're talking to me with this disrespect. So the man says, oh, once he saw the pancakes, he remembered. Because he's right, I couldn't wait to marry her, and therefore with that he was appeased. That's the mashal. The mashal says, the Magim Uduvna, Bnei Israel, we were supposed to be in Egypt for 400 years. That was the gezerah. Arba me'ot shana Hashem told Avraham Avinu. That was the gezerah. And yet, when did Hashem really take us out of Egypt? After how long? 210 years time. Therefore, Hashem gets angry at the Jewish people. Jewish people says to Kadosh Baruch Hu, he goes, you're getting angry with us? Yeah, but you took us out of Egypt, how long? After 190 years earlier. Therefore, it's who couldn't wait to be with who, says Bnei Yisrael to Hashem. Hashem says, oh, it seems like I couldn't wait because I took you out much earlier. Therefore says Moshe Rabbeinu, you're right. Asher hotzeite et Mitzrayim b'koch gadol b'yad hazaka. It's Hashem. It's you couldn't wait to take out the Jewish people. That was the ta'ana. You're right. It wasn't he was telling him, oh, you're so great. You took us out with yad hazaka. Forget about that. He was telling Hashem, who couldn't wait for who? It was Hashem couldn't wait for the Jewish people. And therefore with that, Hashem was, okay, fine. If that's the case, you're right, I couldn't wait. And with that, Hashem is considered calm. And that was the Sanigoria. That was the positive note. That was the lawyer's trick that Moshe used for Hashem in order for him to forgive the Jewish people. Therefore says the Midrash in Tarchuma, Amad Moshe v'limeid alehem sahanigoria. When he defended the Jewish people, Ashin datzah alehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, until Hashem, he was appeased. Amad Moshe, says Moshe Rabbeinu, Bano sha'olam, who's going to tell the other nations? Who's going to tell the Goyim that you were appeased for the golden calf? Amar lo, lech emor lahem, ve'asu li mikdash. That once they make the Mishkan is going to be Mishkan ha'edut. It's going to be testimony that I forgive the Jewish people. Says the Midrash, lekach ketiv Mishkan ha'edut. That's why he calls the tabernacle a Mishkan of edut, of testimony. Shamishkan me'id shashechina b'risa, because the Mishkan itself is a testimony that God rests His presence with the Jewish people. If I didn't forgive them for the egel, I will not rest my presence. The fact that I rest my presence amongst them, it must be that I forgave them, and therefore the Mishkan is edut. The Mishkan is testimony that Hashem forgave the Jewish people. Now we see an unbelievable pshat. By the Mishkan, it wasn't just a way for Hashem to be carried amongst us in the Midbar. It was actually a testimony that Hashem did indeed forgive us for the Masaya Egel. Rabutai, what is something else that we have that Hashem forgave us from Masaya Egel besides Mishkan? Says the next verse, number 6. Says the Gemara Shabbat Daf Kuf Yud Het. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Hiya bar Rabba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol hamishmesh Shabbat kilchato. Anybody that observes Shabbat like it's supposed to be, Afilu oved avodah zara kidor enosh. Even if a person worshipped idols like they did in the generation of Enosh, mochalin lo, he's considered completely forgiven. Shneimar asher enosh yasezot mihalelo at tikre mihalelo ella machul lo. Anybody that's shomer Shabbat, he gets completely forgiven. Says the Bet Yosef, why would it be this way? Why, if a person is doing Shirat Shabbat, does he get a freebie for avodah zarah? Says the Bet Yosef in number 7, Mashikatu afilu oved avodat gilulim mecholim lo mipnei shashabat shikulam keneged kol hamitzvot. We're used to saying this by Torah, but it says Bet Yosef that Shabbat is actually equal to all the mitzvot in the Torah. Shemora hashkecha v'chidush haolam v'torah min hashamayim. Because the fact that we're keeping Shabbat, it's showing that indeed Hashem created the world in 6 days, and He rested on the 7th. The fact that we keep Shabbat, we're bringing testimony that Hashem did create the world, and therefore the fact that we're coming along and we're saying, Hashem, we don't believe anything else. We believe that Hashem made the world. By keeping Shabbat, we're saying we believe that Hashem created the world. Therefore, even if we were to worship avodah zarah, says the Beit Yosef, kishushma Shabbat, vaday alfagav she'oved. Even a person is worshipping avodah zarah, but he keeps Shabbat at the same time, it's not because he believes that avodah zarah has any powers. Therefore, a person who's shomer Shabbat, that's considered the beginning of the teshuvah process. When a person is shomer Shabbat plus teshuvah, Hashem says that avodah zarah that you worshipped, it's gone. Consider it forgiven, forgotten, and forgiven. Says the Shla, he explains deeper. Shla in source number 8. The Inyan. Why is Shmirat Shabbat considered a forgiveness for avodah zarah? The Inyan kavar kadav Rambam b'mada, and in a sefer called Moreh Nevuchim. Ki Enosh, this guy Enosh that people worship avodah zarah in his generation, he wasn't a disbeliever of Hashem. Rak hichnis emtzai. He only wanted to put some sort of middleman, some sort of a buffer zone between him and Hashem. For example, Kochavim u'mazalot. He wanted to put the stars, he wanted to put the mazal in between him and Hashem. La'avod lechvod yitbarach shemo hagadol. And Noshe's kavanah, when he served Avodah Zarah, wasn't to serve Avodah Zarah. He wanted a intermediary between him and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki amar migedulat ha'eved, because the greater the servant is, gedulat ha'adon oda. If you have a great servant, you should know that whoever his master is even greater. Therefore, if I'm coming along and I'm worshiping the Kohavim and the Mazalot, if I come along and I worship Jupiter or Mars or the sun, which is considered great planets, I know from there how great Hashem is. Therefore, if this guy is worshiping Jupiter, it must be that Hashem is even greater than Jupiter. Therefore, says Enosh, his whole logic was, I'm not worshiping Avodah Zarah, the Shem Avodah Zarah. I know that Hashem created the world, but I want something in between. I want something in between me and Hashem, so it'd be easier for me to worship Hashem. Therefore, Migedulat ha'eved, Ro'im Gedulat ha'adon. Therefore, says the Shaare Kadosh. Therefore, Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu Natan Shabbat la'amo Yisrael ve'od hi b'nei b'nechem. Says Hashem, you don't need an intermediary. You don't need a person in between. You don't need a middleman. When it comes to worshiping me, just do Shmirat Shabbat, and through Shabbat, that'll be considered the greatest type of avodah you could do for me. Ubo Shabbat yizbarach me'maaseh bereshit v'nisgav Hashem levado b'yom hahu. Moreh liyichidenu bo yitbarach b'li emtzai. The fact that we do Shmirat Shabbat, it shows that Hashem doesn't need a middleman. We don't need anybody in between us to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kedita b'Midrash Tosham edin ze al ze. There are three people who bring testimony upon each other: HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'Shabbat v'Yisrael. These three people, these three things, Shabbat, Yisrael, and Hashem, were considered intertwined. Al Kain, Hashemesh Shabbat Mochalin Lo. Therefore, anybody that keeps Shabbat, Hashem forgives him. V'chein Yan ha'egel Lo ya kifira bo yitbarach. The egel itself wasn't considered kifira, wasn't considered against Hashem, wasn't considered disbelief in Hashem. Rak bikshu emtzayim menahig b'makom Moshe Rabbeinu. Once they realized Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't there anymore, they thought Moshe Rabbeinu was gone. They wanted somebody in between. So therefore, they chose egel. It was the wrong choice, but that was the choice. Therefore, Hashem says, you don't need egel. You don't need Moshe Rabbeinu. You don't need anybody. You do Shmirat Shabbat. The fact that Shmirat Shabbat itself has a koach to make the Jewish people the quintessential avadim of Kadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore, Rabotai, my point is as follows. We're trying to answer a question. Question is, why does it say ach by the Torah? You wanted to tell me that ach lema'et shmirat Shabbat, that even though Biniyat HaMishkan is important, right? Shmirat Shabbat is even more important. And therefore, don't think you can be Mechalel Shabbat by building Mishkan. So I asked the question, but you can fulfill both. Why would I think that a person would come along and want to do Binyan HaMishkan on Shabbat? Well, according to these sources, Rabotai, what do we see brings kapara? It's two things. It's Mishkan and it's Shabbat. Therefore, I might think to say that since these two things bring kapara for Egel, Shabbat brings kapara for Avodah Zarah, Mishkan brings kapara for Egel, I might think in order to retain a full kapara, a full atonement for Egel, I might think to do both of them at the same time. Because Shabbat brings Mechila on Avodah Zarah, and because Mishkan brings Mechila on Avodah Zarah, I might think in order to achieve full kapara on Egel, I have to do both at the same time. Comes to Torah and tells me, no, Ach Shabbatotai Tishmoru. Ach Shabbat, coming to the Ma'et, to tell me, yes, even though Biniyat HaMishkan is great, still Shabbat is even greater. Therefore, don't tell me it's like a limud. I might think to say that you need both to retain kapara, kamash malan, ach, to tell me no, that if you do Mishkan during the week and Shabbat on Shabbat, it brings a perfect amount of kapara for Heita Egel. So again, I'll just read the question. You might have told me that what? Why do I need the Torah to tell me ach lema'et, to tell me that even though Mishkan is important, Shabbat is even more important, therefore Mishkan does not dochesh minat Shabbat. What do we need it for? Answers because I might have thought to say that since Mishkan and Shabbat, they bring kapara for Egel, I might thought to say they need both at the same time. Kamash malan, you don't need both at the same time. You do Mishkan during the week, and you do Shabbat and Shabbat, and that brings kapara for the Egel. Rabotai, is that clear? Incredible answer by the Midrash. Now, I turn my attention to the first question. The first question was, why does the Torah tell me by Moshe Rabbeinu ve'ata? You told me, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor ve'ata. Why did the Torah feel the need to tell me ve'ata over here? I know it's talking to Moshe Rabbeinu. Why did it single out the word ve'ata? Before I get to the deep answer, I'll tell you the answer of the Aryeh. The Aryeh, he's in source number 9. I'll tell you outside, and then we'll see inside. It says the Aryeh as follows. Well, Moshe Rabbeinu, after being raised in the palace, he goes out for the very first time, and he sees his brothers being tormented, being tortured, being slaved by Paro. And he saw something that didn't make sense. If you want productive workers, is it proper to work them 7 days a week, 18 hours? that wouldn't make any sense, because then you would have no work. You would have a little work done, but the little work that gets done is overridden by the amount of tiredness that they had. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu says, Paro, I want to talk to you logic. Forget about Hashem, forget about mitzvot, forget all about that. You want to have workers that are productive. The answer is yes. Therefore, it doesn't make any sense for you to work them 7 days a week, 18-hour days, without having any break. Says Moshe Rabbeinu to Paro, it makes sense to give them a day off. Paro says, you know what? That makes sense. Which day should we pick? Moshe Rabbeinu says, let's pick Saturday. Just throwing it out there. I think Saturday would be a good day to give him off. Says Paro, done. So it turns out, says the Aryeh, that in Mitzrayim, the Jews, without getting a command from Hashem, they were actually keeping Shabbat, but the fact they were keeping Shabbat wasn't by commandment of God, it was by command of Moshe Rabbeinu. Therefore, now when God actually comes along in this week's Parsha, and He introduces to Bnei Israel the mitzvah of Shabbat, He has to Moshe Rabbeinu ve'ata. That up until now, the Jewish people, they were keeping Shabbat. Why? Because ve'ata. Because you commanded them to do it. However, now, et Shabbatotai tishmoru, they're going to keep Shabbat. Why? Because I'm telling them to do it. Ve'ata comes to tell me, he's coming to Moshe Rabbeinu. Up until now, they were keeping Shabbat because you gave them a day off in Egypt. Now they're keeping Shabbat because I'm telling them to keep Shabbat. Let's see that reason inside. It says that reason on source number 9. Vayar b'silutam. Moshe Rabbeinu saw their suffering. It says the Aryeh, Ra'ah, she'en lehem menucha. The Jewish people, he saw they had no rest. Halach v'amar leParo. So he went and he told Paro, Mi sheyesh lo eved, person that has an eved, im enu noach yom echad b'shavua hu met. Doesn't give the guy a break. He's eventually going to die. Ve'ilu avodetecha im ein ata maniach lehem yom echad b'shavua hem metim. If you don't give your workers a break, they're going to die. Amar lo Paro, lech va'aseh lehem kemoshe tomar. So go and give them a day off. Halach Moshe v'tikin lehem et yom haShabbat lenuach. Therefore, Moshe got up and he made for them Shabbat in order for them to rest. Therefore, the reason why the Torah over here by Shabbat tells me ve'ata and you Moshe Rabbeinu, even though that's not usually the way Hashem talks to Moshe Rabbeinu, it's going to tell him ve'ata. Up until now, they were keeping Shabbat because you said, but now they're getting Shabbat because I said. Simple answer of why the pasuk says ve'ata. But now, Rabotai.
How did he face it when he said that Hashem says that you should keep Shabbat?
Well, it's the pasuk. The way we start in source number 1. Ve'ata daber el bnei Yisrael lemor ach et shabbatotai tishmoru. Source number 1. It's ve'ata. It's up until now. It was you, but now it's going to be ach. Now it's going to be me.
Grammatically, is it clear that ve'ata means up until now it was?
No, it's grammatically. Yes, 100%. Okay, now Rabotai, with your permission, in honor of the crowd that we have today, and in honor of coming up Parashat Parah, I want to give an incredible answer that's given by the rabbis, as follows, in source number 10. Pasuk says, in source number 10, Vayhi beredet Moshe me'ahar, and it was that Moshe Rabbeinu came down from the mountain, Mehar Sinai, u'shnei lochot ha'edut biyad Moshe, and it was that he had the 2 tablets in his hands, B'ridato minahar, as he was coming down from the mountain. Moshe lo yada ki keren or panav. Moshe didn't know that his face was shining. Bidabaro ito, as people were talking to him. What is this referring to? It says Rashi, Vayhi beredet Moshe kishevi luchot achronot b'yom kippurim. That this is referring to that Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the second set of tablets on Yom Kippur. His face began to shine. It says Rashi, what does it mean? Keren or lashon karnaim. What does karnaim mean? Like horns. That he had like horns of light coming out of his head. Sha'or mav'ik ubolet kimin keren. That just like horns protrude out of a person's head, so too the light of Moshe Rabbeinu was protruding out of his head. Where did Moshe get these lights, these horns of splendor? So our rabbi tells us from the cave, Hashem put his hand on Moshe Rabbeinu's face, and he blessed Moshe Rabbeinu, and from there that he has this glow coming out of his face. Our rabbis want to know, why dafka only after the second set of luchot did Moshe Rabbeinu have this glow out of his face? Why not after the first set of luchot? I can argue that maybe the first set of luchot, it was maybe even, I can't say more kadosh because it wasn't, but maybe it was considered more on a more acceptable circumstance, put it that way. The second luchot was given to us after we worshiped the Egel. So I would think to say that the second luchot they're tainted a little bit, but the first luchot was given after Yitzhak Mitzrayim. They just saw Hashem, Zakei Levi Nevehu. I would think that the first luchot have more of a chashivut over the second, but yet we see that Moshe Rabbeinu's face was lit up when? During the second set, not after the first set. So the rabbis want to know what happened. What changed between the first and the second, yeah?
They earned it the second time.
They earned it the second time and they didn't earn it the first time?
First time Hashem gave it to them, the second time they wanted it.
Okay, maybe.
He interfered. He was the He was the defender of Israel.
Oh, very good. So, yes, I want to suggest, if you look in source number 11, if you look in Perek Lamed Bet, Pasuk Zayin, it says, Vayidaber Hashem Moshe lech red, kishichet amecha, that you should go down because your nation has sinned. Asher he'elta meret Mitzrayim, that you brought out of Egypt. Stam kacha, before we get to the point, I did see that when the rabbis tell us that if you look at the Pasuk, Hashem calls Bnei Israel lech kishichet amecha, that your nation has sinned. What is he referring to? What? He's only Moshe Rabbeinu's nation and he's not Hashem's nation? So they want to say that this is actually referring to the Erev Rav, that those quasi-converts, that those Egyptians that converted to Judaism when they saw that Am Yisrael was about to win, they converted to Judaism, but they didn't really mean to convert to Judaism. It's like those guys that any time the Yankees start to win, all of a sudden they're a Yankee fan. Up until now they've been a Met fan. But when the Yankees begin to win, they all of a sudden become Yankee fans. So the Egyptians, they were the same thing. Up until now, they were fans of Paro. Oh, but when they saw that Moshe Rabbeinu was winning, they became quasi-converts and they joined the Jewish people. And therefore, they're called the Erev Rav. It was the Erev Rav who began to worship the Egel. Therefore, it says to Moshe, Lech rei ki shechet amecha. So go down, Moshe, because your nation, the nation that you accepted, these quasi-converts, they have sinned. And therefore comes Moshe Rabbeinu by the Hayta Egel, and he told Hashem, if that's the case, Lama yicharei apecha be'amecha. If it was my nation that sinned, if it was the Erev Rav that sinned, as Lama yicharei apecha be'amecha, then why are you getting angry at your nation? Your nation didn't do anything wrong. If the Jewish people didn't do anything wrong, it was my nation that sinned, therefore why are you getting angry at your nation? Another positive note of how Moshe Rabbeinu, he loosened up the judgment, he sweetened the judgment with those words of prayer. Therefore says the Midrash, so it was after they sinned, Hashem says, go down, Moshe Rabbeinu, go down. Says Rashi, what did Hashem mean when he told Moshe Rabbeinu to go down? Lech red, says Rashi, migdulatecha. You're going to go down from your highness. You're going to go down from your pedestal. Lo natati lecha gedula ela bishvilam. The reason why you're great is because the nation is great. But once the nation is not great anymore, neither are you. And therefore says Rashi, at that time that Jewish people sinned, Moshe Rabbeinu, he was put into excommunication by the Beit Din Shel Mala. And therefore I understand why by the first set of Luchot there was no Karnaim, there was no or, there was no light coming out of his face. Because at this point Moshe Rabbeinu, he's in Nidui from Shamayim. Only after Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Shemayim for 40 days and 40 nights. Mayim lo shatiti, uleichem lo achalti. He didn't eat and he was praying the whole time. Only after that Hashem said, now you're going to be zocheh for a light. But up until that point, Moshe Rabbeinu says, you don't have the merit to have this light coming out of your face because, so to speak, you're only holy because of them. You're only great because of them. Now they're not great anymore, Moshe Rabbeinu, neither are you. Therefore, you can suggest that the reason why he didn't have this light coming out of his face was because they sinned. That's a simple answer. But if you look in the next source, this is a deeper answer. Shabbat in source number 12. Says the Gemara on Shabbat. Rabbi, listen. Darash Simai. Rabbi Simai had a drasha. B'sha'a she'ekdimu Yisrael na'aseh v'nishma. At the time the Jewish people said the word na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, we will listen. Ba'u shishim ribo shel malchei Shaare l'chol echad ve'echad me'Yisrael. There was 60 myriads of angels that came down to the Jewish people. Kashru lo shni ketarim, and they tied on each of the heads of the Jewish people 2 crowns. Crowns of splendor. Very good. Echad keneged na'aseh, v'echad keneged nishma. According to the words that they said, na'aseh v'nishma, they get a crown for each word. However, v'keven shachatu Yisrael, and once the Jewish people came along and they worshipped the golden calf, yaradu 120 ribo melechei Habala. 120 myriads of destructive angels, they came down, and they took off these crowns that Bnei Israel got from saying Na'aseh v'nishma. Shneimar, minatzelu Bnei Israel im me'edim mehar chorev. Says the next paragraph, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, v'kulan, after these destructive angels took off the crowns from the Jewish people, what happened to the crowns? V'kulan, zacha Moshe v'natlan. Moshe Rabbeinu went ahead and he took the crowns and he kept it for himself. The samich le Moshe yikach et ha'ohel, because the very next pasuk says Moshe yikach. Moshe took. What did he take? He took the crowns of glory, the crowns of splendor. Amar Reish Lakish, but it's going to be in the future, says Reish Lakish. Atid, in olam haba, HaKadosh Baruch Hu lehaziran lanu. Hashem is going to return it to us in olam haba. Shneimar, b'dui Hashem yishuvun, uba'u tzion berina, b'smat olam arosham, simcham sheme'olam arosham. Says the Tosfot on this piece of Gemara, on the Shnei Ketarim, these 2 crowns. Shnei Ketarim shel hod hayu. These were 2 crowns of splendor. The fikach kishnatlam Moshe keren or panav. Therefore, once Moshe Rabbeinu took these crowns away from the Jewish people, because the angels took them away, all of a sudden from the crowns, he got this incredible or, this incredible light that was coming out of his face. Do you remember? Bar Minan, after the Twin Towers were destroyed. So after they cleaned up ground zero, as a memory, as a remembrance, they had these two lights that would shoot up in the air, and you could see them anywhere you were in New York. You were to see these two lights in the sky. Lahadil, these were the lights of Moshe Rabbeinu. He had these two lights coming out of his head, and these lights represented these two crowns, one of Na'aseh and one of Nishma. Rabotai, if that's the case, then Moshe Rabbeinu took these crowns away from us. Is there a way, or is there a time where we get these crowns of splendor? Do we ever get them back? Look at a Aryeh in Shaare in source number 13. Techaven, says the Aryeh, Techaven. Alma shibi'anu bi'inyan yismach Moshe b'matarat chalko. Every single Shabbat, b'shacharit, we read this. Yismach Moshe b'matarat chalko. Says the Aryeh, he explains what does this mean. Ki kishala Moshe Rabbeinu el Har Sinai lekabel et Torah. When Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai to get the Torah itself, nitnu elav elef chalkei ora. He got 1,000 measures of light. When the Jewish people, when they sinned with the golden calf, these 1,000 measures of light, they were taken away from Moshe because of the sin of the Jewish people. Only one part of those 1,000 remained with Moshe after they sinned. If you look in the Torah, in a few parshot from now, Parshat Vayikra, if you look in the Torah itself, the word Vayikra, the aleph is written small. Aleph Ze'ira, as they call it. Therefore, it says that the reason why it's written Aleph Ze'ira is in order to hint to us that there was only one chelek, only one part of light that was left over by Moshe Rabbeinu after the Jewish people sinned. This light is significant. This aleph is significant because it signifies to us there was one measure of light left over from Matan Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu had when the Jewish people sinned. Therefore, it says that Aryeh, V'hinei b'chol erev Shabbat, B'bo'o leil Shabbat, every single Friday when Shabbat comes in, Chozer Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom lakachat otam ha'orot shel ha'elef chalakim shelo atzmam she'etavu mimenu. Every single Shabbat Moshe Rabbeinu comes along and he takes those 1,000 chalakim, those 1,000 pieces of light that was taken away from B'chait ha'egel on Shabbat. He comes along and he claims them. He claims them back. Therefore, it says that Aryeh, Shabbat. Therefore, just like when we have an extra neshama on Shabbat, that extra neshama, where does it come from? It comes from these lights, exactly. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, he has access to these lights only on Shabbat. And therefore, he takes them back on Shabbat, those lights that were taken away from him during Chait HaEgel. This is what it means when it says that Moshe Rabbeinu is happy. He's happy on his chelek because it's on Shabbat that he gets back his original chelek, that portion of his that was taken away on Matan Torah. He gets it back on Shabbat. That's what we read. Yismach Moshe Rabbeinu was happy. Why? Because his chelek was given back to him. Those 1,000 measures of light that was given to him on Matan Torah that was taken away, he gets it back when? On Shabbat. Perush, ki Moshe Rabbeinu hu sameach ata. He's happy. B'yom Shabbat. B'matanat chelko atzmo ha'elef. These 1,000 portions that were taken away, he gets it back. And now, but since he's considered Eved Ne'eman, he's considered a trustworthy servant, what does he do? Even though, who was the cause why his lights were taken away? Who was the cause? The Jewish people were the cause, because they worshipped the Egel. Still, Moshe Rabbeinu, what does he do? Because the Jewish people, they lost their crowns of splendor at the time of Chait HaEgel. What does Moshe Rabbeinu do for us as a favor? Says that Aryeh, Hinei ata b'yom Shabbat hu Eved Ne'eman lahazir hapikadon leba'alav vehem Yisrael. It's on Shabbat that Moshe Rabbeinu says, you know what, the Jewish people, I'm going to do you a favor. Those halakim, those crowns that you lost during Chait HaEgel, those crowns of splendor, they are two of them. One can get Na'aseh, but one can get Nishma that you lost on Chait HaEgel. I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to throw you a bone. And on Shabbat, I'm going to give them back to you. It's on Shabbat that we get back these two kitarim, these two crowns. By doing Shmirat Shabbat, we get the crowns back. Why Dafka on Shabbat, however? Why don't you give it to us on a Tuesday? What's special about Shabbat? Well, I can answer according to Reish Lakish. If you remember the Gemara that we quoted above in the second paragraph on source number 12. Amar Reish Lakish. When is Hashem going to give us back these crowns? Says Reish Lakish. Atid. What's Atid? In Olam Haba. In the future. In Olam Haba. Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahaziran lanu. Will give it back to us. Says the Gemara Barachot in source number 14. Barachot Daf Nun Zayin. Shabbat Echad mishishim le'olam haba. Shabbat is considered like olam haba. Therefore, since on Shabbat, when we keep Shabbat, it's considered as if we're olam haba. Therefore, says Hashem, well, they're congruent. They're keeping within the teaching of Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said that they're going to get back the crowns in olam haba. Olam haba is considered Shabbat. Therefore, Shabbat is the perfect time for Moshe Rabbeinu to give back the crowns to the Jewish people, because Shabbat is olam haba. Therefore, I chose a perfect time to give it back to them. That's according to the brachot. However, if you look according to Ohev Israel, says the rabbi called the Aptarov in source number 15. Listen to the following. He says, Hatam, Shehu Mahaziran li Yisab Shabbat. What is the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu gives back these crowns of splendor? Why does he give back Dafka on Shabbat? Says the Ohev Israel, Apima Mar HaGemara, Haniskalael, Kol HaMishmesh Shabbat Kichato. Anybody that keeps Shabbat Kehalacha, Afilu, Oved, Avodah Zarah Kedor Enosh, Muhalin Lo. It's because we keep Shabbat. It's because we come along and we keep Shabbat the way we're supposed to. Are we considered forgiven for Chayta Egel? What was the whole reason why we lost the crowns, Rabotai? We lost it because of Chayta Egel. What do we do on Shabbat, however? What does Hashem do Shabbat? He forgives us for Chayta Egel. Because we keep Shabbat like we're supposed to. Therefore, says the Holy Spirit, because the Jewish people are keeping Shabbat, and Shabbat is considered Mochalina Kol Avanotav, there's no better time to give them back their crowns that they lost because of Egel. How are they keeping Egel? They're keeping Shabbat. It's considered forgiveness for the Egel. Says over Israel, Nimsa, ki kol b'chol Shabbat zochini Israel lekaparat al Chayta Egel. We're considered atonement for Chayta Egel on Shabbat. לכן בכל שבת מקבל משה את 1,000 האורות שניטלו ממנו בחטא העגל. Moshe, he gets back the 1,000 pieces of orot that he lost חטא העגל. והוא בטובעו, in his goodness, מחזיר לישראל את האורות של כתרים. He gives back the lights of the crown of glory, of the crown of splendor. שניטלו מהם באותו חטא. היינו, על ידי שתשמרו את השבת. Because we keep Shabbat, he gives us back those crowns. אז כל אחד ואחד מזרעי ישראל יוכל לחזור ולקח האורות והכתרים שנחסרו מהם על ידי חטא העגל כנזכר לאל. For everybody to keep Shabbat properly. We thought until now Shabbat was nice. Shabbat is a time where we get together with our families, we sing Zmirot, we don't turn on the TV. Says the Holy Spirit, no, it's a time with the Jewish people to kitarim, to crowns of splendor that we lost so many years ago by Chayta Egel. We get it back on Shabbat by keeping Shabbat. Ki Shabbat hu tikun gadol Chayta Egel. Shabbat is considered tikun gadol Chayta Egel. Kemamar hachminu kol mishmesh Shabbat ki chato afilu oved avodah zarah kidor enosh mochalino ve'az Moshe mahazir kol echad ve'echad miYisrael et chelko b'zeh she'emar. That's what it means when it says vayikal Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael. In a few weeks from now we read the Parsha. It says vayakel, and Moshe gathered. He gathered all adat b'nei Yisrael. Says the Ohev Israel, adat hu milashon adaim. That adaim means crowns, it means jewelry. Says the Ohev Israel, Ritzono lemar hatachshitim. This jewelry that we lost, hayinu shemoshe hikil et kol ha'adei ve'akishut shekiblu Yisrael mehar chorev. Moshe Rabbeinu, he gathered all the jewelry, he gathered all the crowns that the Jewish people lost. On Har Sinai, he took it for himself. Ayidei cheta egel niselek mehem. והיא מתיירא משה שלא ישתו בהם ידי זרים וחיצוניים וקליפות חס ושלום. Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid that if now the Jewish people lost the crowns, who's going to take the crowns from them? The crowns are considered taken off. They're off their heads. Who's going to grab it? When you have Kiddusha, when you have holiness, who wants to come and take holiness? The evil spirits. The dark side, as we call it. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid. If I let the crowns just mingle, just float in the air, you're going to have the evil spirits to come and take them. Therefore said Moshe Rabbeinu, I better take them before somebody else takes them. Therefore he collected all the crowns. The Pasuk says, Vaikal Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael. He gathered all the crowns of b'nei Yisrael. He took it for himself. However, Asher al-kah hikil Moshe et kol hanitzotzot hakedoshim la'atzmo. He took all the sparks of holiness for himself. Ube'emet. Who Raya Mehemena? But the truth of Moshe Rabbeinu, he's a loyal servant. And therefore what? But once Moshe Rabbeinu sees that the time has come where the Jewish people could accept their crowns back, what time is that? The time is Shabbat, exactly. Then he returns these crowns to us with happiness, with a happy heart. He doesn't hold it for him. He is happy with what he has. This is what it means when Moshe was happy with his chaylik. He's happy to give over these crowns that we lost, that he collected to protect them from the Chitzonim. He's happy to give it back to us. Therefore, it seems like this is the goal. That on Shabbat, the whole kavanah is, the whole goal of us is to keep Shabbat properly in order to get these crowns back. But the question is it that easy? I know the Pasuk says, in next week's Parsha, it says, Yom Shvi'i Shabbat Shabbatun Hashem. That Yom Shvi'i is Shabbat. Therefore all I have to do seemingly is keep Shabbat, therefore I get these crowns. but there's also a few words before the pasuk. It says, Ki sheshet yamim ta'aseh melacha, that 6 days I do work, and then Yom Shivi'i Shabbat Shabbaton. So it seems like the Yom Shivi'i, there's a prerequisite for the Yom Shivi'i. What's the prerequisite? What's the pre-game before Yom Shivi'i? Sheshet Yamim Ta'aseh Melacha. There must be 6 days. It sounds like for Shabbat, there's a 6-day preparation before Shabbat. I have to be doing something for 6 days that prepares me properly for Shabbat. Just like our goal on Shabbat is to get back these shtei kitarim, to get back these crowns of splendor. It must be that in the 6 days prior to Shabbat, there must be also a hint of these 2 crowns. What are the hint of these 2 crowns during the 6 days of the week that I must be doing to properly prepare me for to accept fully the crowns that I get on Shabbat? What are the things that we do, Rabotai, during the week that's represented in 2 crowns that we do in order to accept Shabbat finally, properly, that I get these 2 crowns on Shabbat? Rabotai, what's the answer? Look at the source number 16, Sfat Emet. Says Sfat Emet, unbelievable, Rabotai, unbelievable. He says, Ita b'sha'ah. At the time the Jewish people said Naseh v'nishma, kashu lahem bet ketarim. We have 2 crowns. Says the Sfat Emet, ha'inyan hu b'chinat hatefilin shel yad b'chinat na'aseh v'shel rosh b'chinat nishma. At the time that I came along, the Jewish people said na'aseh. What does na'aseh mean? I will do. In which part of a body does a person do things? With his hands. Therefore, na'aseh is connected to tefillin shel yad. And nishma, what a person hears. Where does he hear it from? He hears it from his ears. He hears it from his head. Therefore, the nishma is connected to tefillin shel rosh. Says the Sfat Emet, Uma shemamshichin ata ayideh hatefillin haya az murgash benefesh kol ish Yisrael otan ha'orot u'muchin haba'im milamala. These lights, these shnei ketarim that come from above, כי כל כתר הוא המשכת כוח מלמעלה מהשגת האדם. הוא בחינת נשמה יתרה כמו שכתבנו במקום אחר. הרי מבואר כי שני הכתרים שנטלו מישראל. These 2 crowns that Moshe Rabbeinu took from the Jewish people, אחרי חיטה חטא העגל, הם בבחינת תפילין של יד ושל ראש. ולכן שבת ain't tzrichen tefillin. That's why on Shabbat we don't need to wear tefillin, because since on Shabbat we get kaparah for Chet HaEgel, and on Shabbat we get the 2 crowns back, and since the tefillin is also crowns, there's no reason to mix crowns together. If during the week I wear crowns, and on Shabbat I get the crowns back, there's no reason to mix crowns with crowns. And therefore says Sfat Emet, you don't wear tefillin on Shabbat, is because Shabbat we get the crowns back. There's no reason to replace it with the crowns of tefillin. Says the Sfat Emet, Shabbat machazvin b'nei Yisrael otan ha'ketarim. It's on Shabbat that we get these 2 crowns of splendor back that was taken away by Chet HaEgel. V'yocholin להרגיש בעצמם אותן האורות שזוכים על ידי תפילין בחול. So it turns out that the sheshet yamim ta'aseh melacha, and then Yom HaShivi Shabbat Shabbaton, the 6 days is a preparation. We'll call it a pre-game. It's a pre-game to Shabbat itself. Just like on Shabbat, the actual game itself is to win the crowns back. We keep Shabbat. Hashem says, I hereby forgive you for Chet HaEgel. Once He forgives us for Chet HaEgel, because Kol Hashem Shabbat, Mochalina Kol Avonotav, Hashem says, I forgive you for Chet HaEgel. Therefore, whatever sin, whatever ramification it was when I worshipped the Egel, namely the fact that I lost my 2 crowns, Hashem says, I give it back to you. But there has to be a preparation. A person has to do something before Shabbat to be zochet, to merit the full experience of Kitarim at Shabbat. What is that? Tefillin. When a person puts on tefillin during the week, it's like a pre-game. This is the taste. He gets a taste of the 2 Kitarim, of these crowns of splendor. He gets a taste of it. What happens during what's going to happen on Shabbat. Finally, it's considered a taste of what happens during the week. And with this, Rabotai, we explain a very strange halacha in Shulchan Aruch. It says Maran in Siman Lamed Bet, in source number 17. This is Seif Mem Daled. It says Maran, it's considered a traditional law that what? That when you're tying the tefillin, you should fasten it, you should tie it together with what? A hair of an animal, of a kosher animal. Or chayat tehorim. Any animal that's considered tahor, you use that to tie the tefillin. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, the minhag is that the minhag is to use a hair of an egel. Why would you use a hair of an egel to tie the tefillin? Isn't the egel considered something negative? Why are you using something negative to tie something positive? Says Eryeh Rabbah in the last source, Eryeh Rabbah, source number 18. V'atam d'shel egel k'tav bet Yosef kedei sheyiskor maseh egel v'lo chata. So I should remember the chet egel. I shouldn't sin. However, it says Perush kevan she'adayin avon ha'egel kayam she'in lecha, etc. He quotes the levush. Look at the levush, and he says ve'levush katav shel egel shehi mitzvat tefillin kapara al otu ma'aseh. Because when we put on tefillin, Rabotai, it's considered a pregame. It's considered the beginning of the teshuvah process. Just like by the egel, We lost our kitarim. The tefillin that we wear during the week is considered the atchalat teshuvah. It's considered the beginning process that we start in order to fully gain kapara for the egel. It starts during the week, and when does it finish? Finishes on Shabbat. That's why Maran says that when you're tying the tefillin, tie with maaseh egel, tie with the hair of an egel, with the sayar egel, because it's egel. We're supposed to be reminded of the egel, but also to remind us that this is the beginning of the teshuvah process. When you put on tefillin, shal yad, tefillin sharosh, it reminds us this is the shnei ketarim. This is our crowns. This is the lesson of the egel. And now we understand, Rabotai, why does it say in the pasuk ve'ata? Talking to Moshe Rabbeinu, why does it say ve'ata? You, I know you. He's talking to Moshe Rabbeinu. The answer is because ve'ata, Moshe Rabbeinu, it was you who took the kitarim away from the Jewish people. Let's look back at the pasuk. See how it fits so well. Look at back to source number 1. It says, "Vayom Hashem Moshe Lemor ve'ata." And now, meaning you, it was you who took away the 2 crowns by the Jewish people. How are they going to get it back? By keeping Shabbat, they're going to get those 2 crowns back. So it's ve'ata Moshe Rabbeinu, you who took the crowns away from them. How are they going to get it back? Ach Shabbetutai Tishmoru. Once they do Shemirat Shabbat, that's when they get it back. So it's a combination. So the lesson of the Egel Rabotai is, in combination of these 2 mitzvot, we have mitzvah tefillin, we have mitzvah Shemirat Shabbat. These 2 things combined to each other, they bring kapara for the Egel. That's what it's supposed to remind us. So until now, Rabotai, we thought that tefillin is something nice. It's something that, there's a reason, by the way, why Chabad chases around people on the street and on the beach and everywhere that's considered random. They say, put on tefillin, put on tefillin. Why is tefillin so important? Because Rabotai reminds us, this is our crowns. This is the karnaim shel or. This was the horns of Moshe Rabbeinu that shone light. It's represented in the tefillin. That's why tefillin is so important. Shabbat, Rabotai, Shabbat. We have to be mehazek in these 2 inanim. Shabbat and tefillin, the 2 are connected very well. I'll just end with a short story. I read earlier on today that there was a man that he had a flight to catch from Boston to Los Angeles. And he had a meeting in LA. It was a very important meeting, and he said he couldn't miss it. And he's sitting there, he gets, I feel like anytime a person travels on an airplane, it's the most stressful time ever. The whole vacation that you went on for the past week is undone by the airport ride on the way back. And the guy was very nervous at the airport, but Baruch Hashem, he got through it. He puts down his bags and everything is okay. He had actually a few minutes to go look around the duty free. A few minutes later, boarding call, he gets on the plane. He sits down and he realizes his tefillin is not next to him. He starts getting nervous. He realizes that he left his tefillin where? By the waiting area. And he gets nervous and he tells the stewardess, he goes, listen, I'm gonna go off just for 1 second. I forgot a very important bag. And she tells him, no, sorry, sir, you can't do that. Once you get on the plane, there's no getting off the plane. He says, please, understand, it's my tefillin. It's my, I think they call it fallacies in English. It's important. Thank you. It's important. Therefore, please just let me go. And she says, you can't get off the plane. He says, you know what? Let me speak to the pilot. Let me speak to the manager. Usually maybe the pilot won't understand. He's causing a whole tumult. He begins to scream on the plane, my tefillin, I need my tefillin. And say, no, sir, if you want it, you could go get it. So he's thinking, I could go get it and I could come back. But once they let him off, they locked the plane. They locked it, and he wasn't able to get back on. That plane was plane number 175, and that was one of the planes that crashed into the Twin Towers. It happens to be that everybody in the plane, obviously the story is a negative story, but you see that tefillin, it saved lives. And by the way, there's a PS to that story. It wasn't only the fact that he saved his own life by the tefillin. It was because he caused such a balagan on the plane. The plane was delayed for 18 minutes. The terrorists originally planned for the 2 planes to hit the Twin Towers. It was supposed to hit at the same exact time, bringing much more casualties. However, since the plane was delayed by 18 minutes, there was thousands of people that were able to get out of the Twin Towers before the actual second plane hit the Twin Towers itself. Therefore, we say Rabotai, the inyan of tefillin and Shabbat, everything's connected. We thought up until now that Shabbat is considered something that it's considered asur. I can't do this, I can't do that, and maybe it's a time that I just go to sleep and I cruise through Shabbat without having to do anything. According to what we're learning tonight, Rabotai, it's 100% incorrect. Shabbat is considered the splendor of our crowns. When we keep Shabbat properly, Hashem forgives us not only for avirot of other avodah zarah, but for Hayta Egel, which is considered one of the biggest avirot that we have. Therefore, when we properly do Shemirat Shabbat, when we properly put on tefillin, we should be zocher to the shnei ketarim, the crown of splendor. Shabbat shalom, mevorach.